Hey guys, it's Tuesday,
And you know what that means. I'm Amber.
and I'm Alex, and this is True Crime and Chill. Okay, so I had actually a completely different case lined up for this week. I ended up changing it to this one because for some reason it was just really super intriguing, and I saw reviews about it on Amazon because there's a documentary on Amazon actually, and yeah, and I feel like it's one that a lot of people really haven't heard about. This week's case is actually about the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre, and if I'm pronouncing that wrong, please tell us. Um, we both believe I might be pronouncing it correctly, so we're just gonna go with that.
This is not one that I have heard about, truthfully. So I am learning along with the listeners that don't know this one.
Now, I am going to kind of tone it down just a little bit. I know that we normally do graphic stuff in our show, but this was huge. So I ended up coming across this case because of a documentary that I had come across on Facebook actually, but it's on Amazon and stuff. They were talking about it on Facebook called 77 Minutes, and it was actually made about the shooting. I do have to warn you though, if you do decide to watch it, it is very graphic and it shows actual footage from the crime scene, such as photos, videos, all that stuff. But before we dig into the nitty gritty, let's start at the beginning.
Let's get to it.
So, James Oliver Huberty was actually born in Canton, Ohio on October 11th, 1942. Now, from the beginning, this guy had it pretty rough. He contracted polio that ended up actually contributing to other health issues in his life. His mom ended up basically abandoning the family because his father bought a house in Amish country and she refused to live with him. Something else that I found was basically that because of the polio, he was barred from serving his country and all that stuff. So he was kind of upset about that as well. He actually grew up super resentful with the fact that his mom left too, and would be quoted as saying I blame God for taking my mom away and everything. Because it's not like she wasn't visiting him. Like she straight up just said, "Hey, peace out." Like she dipped and never looked back. So in 1962, James actually ended up going to college and getting a bachelor's degree in sociology. And he actually ended up going to a different school after he got his bachelor's and getting certifications in embalming. But he would never actually use those certifications. So the dude knew how to embalm somebody, but didn't use it.
I mean, you can't really fault him for getting trained in something like that. There are morbid things that really draw people in. I mean, look at us. We run a murder podcast. But you actually, in order to be a funeral director, have to have degrees and stuff. And that's one of the ones you have to have. So.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, no. It's a pretty cool thing. You learn how to embalm a person, which I don't know if you're not working as an embalmer or as a funeral director. I feel like that's something you wouldn't need to know unless the world ended and zombies were rising. But yeah, no, I mean, I've had an intense fascination with murder podcasts and true crime stories since I was younger. My mom always thought it was she thought it was weird how young I started out, but eventually she was like, "Oh, hey, we could watch these shows together." So yeah, I totally get the morbid hey, a morbid curiosity to let's learn this. But so while he was actually getting his certifications in embalming, he actually met his wife Etna. They ended up marrying in 1965 and had two children together, Zelia and Cassandra. As the years went by, though, it was starting to show that both James and Etna were a little more unstable. A few fries short of a Happy Meal, a few bricks short of a house. They were in some interviews that I saw. Yeah, well, when I read about her in some interviews and stuff, she seemed like a very normal person. But then I dug a little bit deeper, and so for those of you who don't know, Criminal Minds, if you know Criminal Minds and stuff, the show actually has a Wikipedia page, obviously, and it's about all the murders that they talk about, or murders that they were inspired by and stuff. So they have full on bios, and this one plus another article that I found just kind of shed a lot of light on the domestic violence between both James and Etna. And I'm not saying James was violent towards Etna and everything. No, I'm saying they were both crazy. James was a little bit more unstable. The family ended up moving frequently due to job loss, as well as a fire that actually ended up destroying their home and made them move back to Canton, Ohio, which is James's hometown. There it was noted that the couple were physically abusive to each other. And Edna was even quoted as telling Zelia to physically harm a classmate at a birthday party, and then went on to threaten the classmate's mother with a 9mm.
Whew, that's intense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, she was arrested for this, obviously, but the gun was like never confiscated. I actually do believe that was actually one of the weapons that was carried out to do this massacre later. James also ended up threatening to shoot his neighbor's dog, and actually ended up killing his own dog in a different situation because the dog damaged his car.
Ah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, these guys really weren't in the right head at all. And I saw pictures of James, and you know how they say, like, sometimes perpetrator fits, he very much fits this. Very much fits this. And guess what? He's white. Yeah. So from there, it really went all downhill. James ended up actually losing out on a huge apartment deal. It just kind of went under, so he lost a lot of money with that. He ended up thinking like that he ended up becoming like a survivalist, thinking foreign emissaries were going to mess up American banking and that the world would be taken over by them. So they ended up kind of like, being survivalists, stockpiling foods, having all this stuff or whatever. Eventually, James ended up getting into an accident that made his entire, like, I think it was like right side kind of just go numb and shake uncontrollably. So that, coupled with the polio, it just kind of made the situation even worse. So after that accident and a few more job losses, James and his wife packed up, and they originally moved to Tijuana and stuff. So they were living in Tijuana for a little bit, and then they actually packed up again and moved to San Diego, specifically the San Ysidro area, where James ended up getting a security job that, funny enough, he was actually dismissed from 2 weeks before the incident.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it was the 80s, so background checks were, they took a little longer, so sometimes it was hard, you'd hire somebody and then the background check would come back and you'd have to wait. So maybe they saw some unstable things in his background check after it came back, and that's why they had to let him go.
Yeah, no, and honestly, I thought that too. But I mean, at the same time, when you're living in different states, like, I wonder how often back then people actually like background check from different states. Like, because if you didn't put your name down that you lived somewhere, there really was no proof that you lived in that state back then. You could say that you lived in Washington your whole life, moved to California for like a year, do some shady shit down there, and then move back to Washington and be like, oh yeah, no, I've never gotten arrested in possession of a firearm or something like that.
Yeah. So, okay. So when I was working for, there was a company here in town I was working for, and we had to do background checks. And this was early 2000s. It still was taking weeks to get back checks from other states. And that was in the early 2000s. Yeah. So in the 80s, I imagine,
and that was
even
if
just
they even checked the other states.
Yeah. So I imagine the stuff that was local still took 2 weeks to come back.
Yeah,
so
more than likely, they just didn't even bother to check with the other states. But no, I mean, like, it was the 80s. I mean, they didn't really, technology-wise, they weren't really all that great. But, I don't know if, like, maybe it was they found something unstable, or they just found out he just wasn't a right fit for the job. Like, it just really depended. But it never really mentioned why he was fired. It just said that he was.
Mm-hmm.
Due to it being the mid 80s, there really isn't too much on this case because a lot of it is newspaper clippings or like very few like newscast broadcasts and stuff like that. Right. The day before the actual shooting, James called. So this is July 17th. Okay, James called mental health hotline. Okay, that they had in San Ysidro. He told them that he was feeling not like himself. That he thought that he might be going crazy, but he felt very calm and collected while he was talking. So he very much sounded like he was having a conversation with these people. So they told him, they're like, you know what, we will have somebody call you back within 24 hours. However, they ended up putting his name down wrong. They ended up putting his name down as James Schuberty. So when they went to go like look up his stuff and like call him and everything, like they never gave him a call back because they got the name wrong. And then they also marked him down as like non-emergent. So, because he was so calm, so they just didn't make it a hurry to like call him back.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's also the 80s, and mental health didn't have the same sort of presence as it does today. So people, didn't think as much about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and James sat by the phone, like his wife even said, she was like, he sat by the phone like literally all day the next day, and when they hadn't called him back, he basically was just like, you know what, society had its chance, and just kind of was like, hey, let's go do this. So the next day was July 18th, 1984, and that's when he waited by the phone basically all day. James ended up actually taking his family to the zoo after he had gotten done waiting by the phone. They had a nice lunch at a different McDonald's location and ended up going home. From there, James ended up packing up a 9mm Browning HP, a semi-automatic Uzi, and a Winchester pump-action shotgun, and said goodbye to his wife. Later, she would say that when he asked him where he was going, he said, "I'm hunting humans."
Okay. So a couple things here. First of all, it's sounding like he really he was hoping to be able to trust anybody in society. And when that failed him, he was like, screw it, everybody sucks. F the world.
Yeah.
He also, it's very clear that if he went and had a really nice day with his family before he went to go do this, it sounds like he was pretty aware that he was not coming back from it. So he went and did all the nice fun things, just had a nice day with his family, and then said, peace out.
Basically, and he was just like, I'm hunting humans. I'm like,
why didn't he call the police when he said that?
So the police asked her that. She was like, they were like, okay, so what did your husband say to you before he left? She's like, oh, he said this. Did you not think to call us? And she's actually said, she's like, I really don't have a good reason why I didn't call the police. Like, I just didn't. And, maybe it was because, the domestic abuse part of their relationship, where that wasn't, an uncommon thing for him to say to her or something. So she probably didn't think too much. But,
he sounded a
James
little
ended up leaving the house.
So.
Yeah, oh God, yeah. They both were. But James ended up leaving the house. And as he's going out, his daughter Zelia is coming home. And she looks at him and she's like, where are you going? He's like, I'm not coming back. I love you. And he just kept going. And she was like, okay, whatever. And she, again, did not think too much of it. So James actually got into his car and actually checked out a few different locations, including another restaurant, a department store, and a grocery store, I believe it was. So he was actually just looking around, just driving around, figuring out where he would do this. And he ended up making the decision to go to the McDonald's in San Ysidro Boulevard. So he gets out of his car and he starts walking down the street with one of his guns in plain sight and is making his way towards the restaurant. A bystander actually, so I've gotten conflicting reports, because in one report it says it was a bystander who saw it. Another report says that it was, so the conflicting reports I have is there's a report that says it was a bystander who saw James, and that's who made the first 911 call. Okay, but another report is says that a victim, one of the victims, who was a passerby who was hit by a stray bullet, then it was a little boy, and they ended up bringing him into the post office, and from there he was able to be like, no, there's somebody shooting at McDonald's, where the post office actually called the first 911 call. But regardless, somebody called 911. Okay. Somebody either saw James with the weapon, or that post office story is true that I've been reading, and somebody called 911. And something happened to where dispatch ended up giving the SWAT team a different address. So it was to a McDonald's 3 blocks away and stuff. Plus they ended up, California traffic, rush hour in the 80s, they got stuck in traffic. There was just a lot of stuff. Well, this was just a lot of stuff, and they weren't trained on this. This is one of the first mass shootings in America. This is one of the first mass shootings. There's ones that have been 5 or 6 or something, but this is the first one that actually had 20 people dead and over 40 people injured. Dead or over 40 people dead or injured. It's a lot of people. So they just weren't. So they end up going to the wrong place and stuff. And the public, when that actually came out, the public was super mad about that. The public was like, well, why weren't you there earlier? Why didn't you do this?
I mean, I can understand the public being appalled at it, but they were given the wrong address, and it's
Yeah.
possible that it had to do with the computers that the dispatch was using. They're just like, "Oh, this McDonald's near San Ysidro Boulevard," instead of on it would have directed them someplace else. So yeah,
Well,
but
but the thing
that's
is,
just
I mean, I feel
unfortunate.
like since it was 3 blocks away, like I feel like they were kind of like how McDonald's are now, where they're like McDonald's 4 or 5 blocks, McDonald's. So there's like 6 McDonald's on the same street sometimes, and you're like, what the
Yeah,
heck?
like
But like
Starbucks. Yes.
people like Starbucks, but like people didn't think of it like that. Like they just saw like the police were wrong in this, which again, it was the 80s. Okay, like how much training could they possibly have had on this? So while the guy is calling 911, okay, and all this stuff is happening, dispatch is dispatching SWAT, like everything's going on. James is just casually walking into a McDonald's and everything, and just he's totally casual. Like witnesses remember saying that when he first walked in, there was really nothing about him that like drew the eye. He was just totally casual, and he walked in, and it wasn't until he walked in and like put a gun in the air that everybody was like, "Oh shit, something's happening." So he walks in to this McDonald's, and this is about 3:40 in the afternoon right now. So it's about 3:40 in the afternoon, and he instructed everybody to just lay down on the floor. So everybody either lay down on the floor or just kind of like cowered in their thing or whatever, but they did what they were supposed to be doing. So when they did this, they said it was about a minute response time. When they did this, James ended up looking around and he shot people. Like he just ended up opening fire, like just shooting all these people and stuff. So there were a lot of people who ended up dying. There were a lot of people who ended up dying. There were a lot of people who ended up being injured, and there were a few people that were escaping. But the people that were escaping as well, James was also alternatively like shooting at them, and then shooting at the people on the ground, then shooting at them, and then shooting at the people on the ground. Uh, so and then that happened within like the first 10 minutes. So within 10 minutes of him being there, that happens. And then he starts kind of walking around and shooting people who are still alive but injured on the ground. So like he would find somebody and notice them like they were still breathing but they were unconscious. So he'd shoot him in the back of the head. Or like he'd find people who were there were these there was this family who it was the wife and the dad, it was the wife and the husband, their son, and then their son's friend. So the wife and the dad obviously like threw themselves over the kids and stuff. And the wife and his wife and son did not make it, but he made it, and his son's friend did. So, but like they said that like he would like go around and he would like shoot him like 3 or 4 more times in the body to do that. And as he was doing, and so like as he was doing this, like people were trying to escape and people were trying to move and everything. And so then he walked around and actually shot the people who were still alive. If you tried to escape, he would shoot at you. As he was doing this, witnesses actually heard him shouting. He's like, I killed thousands and I'll kill thousands more. And people thought that meant he was former military, but like James had never served a day in his life. So people thought maybe this was like a PTSD attack or something, but then it came out that James had never actually been in any kind of war, even though he had also said they had reports of witnesses saying that he was saying that he had served in the Vietnam War and stuff. So, but he had never enlisted a day in his life. So everybody was like, wait a minute. So this wasn't just a PTSD attack.
No, this sounds like a pretty severe psychotic break of some kind. Like he almost like he was projecting who he wished he was rather than who he was. Or it could also be again like a split personality thing where it's this person where in his mind they went and served in the Vietnam War, and and so that's the person that was killing everybody. But I mean, gosh, that'd be such a tough. I can't even imagine being one of the people in the McDonald's. I mean, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You can try and run and get shot,
Like
or you can lay there and get shot. I just
like
I
this
this guy's
shooting was
nuts.
actually compared to like the Columbine shooting with Dylan Harris and
Yeah.
Eric Kebold and stuff, because that's exactly what they did. Is they would go around shooting at people who were already bleeding on the ground.
Yep.
And stuff. So this shooting was actually brought up a lot in a lot of discussions about like Columbine and Parkland and Pulse and all the other shootings that we have in America and stuff. But
Right.
and
It's a
honestly,
terrorist
like
attack.
even if it literally is, but honestly, most shooters never really give up why they do it, and because 9 times out of 10 they don't live long enough. But even if they do live long enough and they're in jail and they're sitting in jail right now, like they still don't give up why they did it. They never really have an exact reason. It's always something that's different. So I feel like even if James had been taken alive and they were able to, like, interview him, like we would never get a straight answer on why he decided to do that. So all this had begun at 3:40. Okay, around 4:07 p.m. So this is almost about 30 minutes afterwards. This is about 20 minutes after this had first started. Miguel Rosario, who was actually just a patrol officer at the time, I actually believe he's a detective now, when he arrived on scene believing it was an accident because, gunshots are going to be going off in the neighborhood. People are going to hear it and be like, oh my God, something's happening over the McDonald's. So he arrives on the scene by himself, believing that honestly, like, all of this was just an accident. He was like, okay, like, I'm going to go check it out. Maybe, like, gang violence, stuff like that or whatever. Because, like, who knew in California? Like, California is just, who knows over there? But he pulls up, and that's when James actually comes out and started shooting at him. And Miguel had to actually, like, run behind his car, take cover, call in SWAT, and, like, back out and try to get away from there and everything. They ended up actually thinking James had accomplices because of how many bullets were dispensed at the time. Because, like, this dude had 3 different types of weapons and so much ammo. And so this entire time this was going on, before SWAT got the call, the original McDonald's, like, was the wrong one and all that stuff and everything. And, like, right before Miguel, like, pulled up, there were people still going to the McDonald's when, like, the cops arrived and everything. Because the thing is nobody really knew what it was because they arrived. Because like, they got reports of some gunshots in the neighborhood. So they tell people, oh, make sure, like, you take cover or blah, blah, blah and everything. Like, make sure you get out of the street and everything because 9 times out of 10, that's usually when it happens. But
this is also the when 80s. They don't have the same reporting methods then that they do now. Like, now you can get alerts on your phone. That was not a thing then at all.
Exactly. So people were, like, going into this McDonald's. And unfortunately, when they arrived, James would literally just shoot at them. So, like, these 3 boys had come up on their bikes. They were David Flores and Omar Alonso. They were with actually a friend as well. And as David and Omar arrived, all 3 of them were shot. Like, David, Omar, and their friend were alive. Like, all 3 of them were shot. Like, James just shot at them. There's, like, 13-year-old boys and stuff. And the friend who was with David and Omar, he was quoted as saying, like, he had to lay as still as possible. And he basically watched, like, one of his friends start puking after he had gotten shot. And then, like, one of his other friends had, like, gotten shot in the head and everything. And so he had to sit there and watch as these, like, his friends were dying. And he had to be as still as possible because he didn't know if he was going to be next. And another 2 other victims were Miguel and Ada Victoria. They were an older couple and stuff. And, they were going to McDonald's for lunch and everything. And they ended up going inside. And as Miguel, like, opened up the door for Ada, James shot Ada in the head. And so, like, witnesses were like said, like, that Miguel was, like, on the floor with her and, like, holding her head and, like, screaming curses at James and stuff and, like, yelling at him and condemning him to hell and stuff. And as he was doing that, like, James shot him in the head and stuff. And so, like, and then there's another report from, like, a woman who went through the drive-thru and noticed, like, all the shattered bullets and saw, like, people and, like, saw, like, James, like, in the drive-thru window, like, with his gun, like, shooting people. And she ended up, like, reversing so quickly that she ended up hitting the light pole behind her. She got out and hid in the bushes with her daughter and stuff. God. And so, like all these things. So people are still going. And then finally SWAT is actually able to arrive and get help. So eventually SWAT was actually able to get up and set a perimeter. Well, inside, victims, were running around. Like, McDonald's back then, because I don't think they actually renovated McDonald's until, like, the middle of the 2000s. So the McDonald's in the 80s were about the same as the McDonald's, like, that I remember when I was, like, 6.
Yeah. Well,
so,
okay.
Which were super cheesy.
Let me rewind here because actually I can tell you the answer to this, believe it or not. So the McDonald's that was there when you were young was not the same McDonald's that was there when I was young. Because there's a clause in the franchise contract that it has to be renovated every so often. So when I was little, like the McDonald's here in Port Angeles, right? It had an outdoor play area. Then they built over
that because they got done with you. They got done with you because I vaguely remember.
No, The outdoor play area, I remember because I was watching
Well, no,
old home
maybe it was the
movies because
one
I
in
had them
Bremerton.
digitized for my dad for Father's Day.
Yeah, maybe it was
And
the one in Bremerton that I remember.
right, because the one here, they it was outdoor when I was 6, and then when I was about 8, they turned it into an indoor play area, but it still had all the same equipment. And then they renovated it
Mm.
probably in, like, I want to say probably the early 90s, just based on the decorations and stuff, like all the neon
Oh
and
god,
the
yeah.
stuff that was in there, the giant big screen TV in the corner. And so really there's a clause in the franchise contract that it has to be updated every so many years in order to comply with standards. So yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be
Yeah.
probably
But like I
exactly the
mean like
same, but it doesn't mean that it was a
but I
good
mean like
layout. It was probably very open.
in general, because I mean looking at the pictures, I really don't remember like McDonald's ever looking like that. But like I mean in general, it's not that big of a place to run. At least back then it wasn't. So a lot of the
Yeah.
victims actually end up trying to, hide in the kitchen and stuff. And James is looking around. He ended up finding them. When he found them, he yelled, "Oh, there's more. You're trying to hide from me," and opened fire. He actually
Well,
ended
of
up
course
killing
they're
a
trying
few
to hide
people as
from
well as
him.
wounding them. Yeah, right. But no, he ended up actually killing a few people and then as well as wounding them. But thankfully, some of those wounded people were able to like get to. There was a back like downstairs utility room down in the basement, and I don't know if like they were able to lock the door from the inside so that way James couldn't get in, or like the door was steel enough to where like he couldn't get in or something. But either way, they were able to hide in there and wait until like police were able to like get in and like help and stuff. A fire truck had actually pulled into view of the restaurant, and James ended up opening fire on it and wounding some of the firemen inside. So, like, literally, like this guy set out to do maximum damage, like just maximum damage. So finally, at 5:17 p.m. Okay, so this started at 3:40. Okay, this is now 5:17. A SWAT officer was actually able to fire the bullet that ended James's rampage and killed him instantly. The officer, Charles Foster, was later quoted saying, "I never did see his face. The first time I actually was able to see James, he was sitting on the counter in the middle of the building. Then he got up and started walking towards the door where we had a better view of him from the neck down. He stopped about 6 feet from the door, so I took a shot. He dropped the Uzi and was thrown back a few feet." Talking about what he saw when he took place, like that was basically him talking about what he saw when it took place when James was shot. So when James was shot, they ended up people were afraid to move inside the restaurant. If they were alive, they were afraid to move because they thought that maybe he was faking it. They didn't shoot him correctly. Like it wasn't until somebody inside who was like right next to his body was able to like look at the officer through the scope and like nod that he's dead, because they radioed in, is he dead? Like can you tell us, nod yes or no if he's dead? And so she was able to like look at him and like be like, yeah, he's dead. That they were actually able to get inside and start helping like, the victims and stuff. And like it was like I saw crime scene photos and it was bad. Like the floor was red and stuff, obviously from all the blood, and like it's just it's insane. It's absolutely insane.
That's so this is so I mean, it's terrifying. It would be terrifying to hear. I mean, it's terrifying to hear about it, even though it was more than, almost 30 years ago. And I just, it's weird. When I was little, I had a dream that terrified me. And to the point where it sticks with me even now. I was probably 5 or 6 when I had this dream. And so just to reiterate, this happened the year that I was born. So there's no way that I would have known about this particular event. But I had a dream where I was like in a war zone and people were coming through and shooting people that were already down on the ground just in case to make sure that they were really dead. So I remember having to put myself in a position that was unnatural and having to pretend that I was dead, like having to lie really, really still. And, as a kid, like that's not a normal dream to have, but I remember it terrified me. And to the point where I still remember it today. And so hearing about this event where that's what this guy was doing is really scary.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder if maybe I somehow heard about this story when I was very little and it resonated with me to
And it
where
kind of
it
is that.
caused me to have that nightmare.
Oh yeah. No, I
So
mean, I have dreams about TV shows if I watch them too many times. So I mean, that's totally possible. Like it's just kind of put in there.
Yeah. It just
Yeah, but no,
just the fact
it's
that
just terrifying.
the fact that he was killing people that, were not even moving, like, if they were down on the floor injured, you know, and he was
Yeah.
killing them. That's so how does a person do that? I don't understand.
I mean, look at the cases we study. Like, how does a person do any of this?
Well,
They're
see, but
not
that's the
people.
thing. There's psychology in some of it, like they're not out to hurt everybody. They're out to hurt oftentimes, like especially with serial killers, it's oftentimes like one particular person or one particular type of person. Mostly. Not
Yeah.
always. Okay. But for the most part, it's, people having a psychotic break. And sometimes it's even like a sexual motivation, right? Like it makes them feel
Yeah.
good because there's some kind of memory linked with it, right? I'm not saying
Yeah.
that in any side, shape, or form is it okay. Please don't misunderstand me. But this, I mean, and that's really the difference between like a serial killer or just, a murder and then a mass murder, because this is just this is malicious and it is evil beyond what
Yeah,
a
no,
lot
he
of these
set
other
out to do the maximum. He set out to do the maximum damage for sure. Like, he definitely did. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm just
and
gonna do this and go from
that
there.
makes it
No,
a
it was the
terrorist
maximum
attack.
damage.
Right. It really is the difference between a murderer and a terrorist attack. And that's what this is. It's a terrorist attack. He was out to inflict the
But
maximum
remember,
amount of
white
damage
shooters are
and
not
the maximum care.
terrorists. In America's eyes, they aren't. They're just mentally deranged people.
Well, that's fine that
No.
that's what they
But
think.
yeah,
But
no.
the whole point of a terrorist is somebody who's out to inflict the maximum amount of terror. And that's exactly what this guy was doing.
Oh yeah, no. This guy was absolutely insane. So the entire incident lasted 77 minutes. Okay,
Oh my
that is 77 minutes. It's like it's a little over an hour. In 77 minutes, James is actually able to expel 257 rounds and kill 20 people, as well as wounding about 20 more. One of the wounded was actually declared brain dead upon their arrival at the hospital. 17 were killed inside the building, and 4 were killed outside of the building. Crime scene photos are, like I said before, brutal. Like you see victims on the floor, like just covered in blood. Like there's a victim.
Uh, that math doesn't add up. If 17 people were killed inside and 4 were killed outside, that's 21.
Well, they counted the guy who was brain dead at the hospital.
Okay.
So the 20 people, so they counted the guy that was brain dead at the hospital, and he was originally part of the survivor account. So the original reports do say 20, because when they counted that, they meant the people who actually died inside the store. So when they got in there, the guy who was brain dead at the hospital was actually still breathing. So they didn't count him as the 17 that were killed inside the building until after he had passed away.
Got it.
So,
Okay.
but he was the only one. But he was the only one that had critical injuries that actually made it to a hospital. Unfortunately, it didn't help. But I think the youngest victim was like 8 months old. The youngest victim that died, the youngest victim in general that was injured was 4 months old.
Oh my God.
So there was an 8-month-old that died, and then the 4-month-old was the youngest that was actually injured in general. And the oldest was actually 74, and that was the married couple and such. You actually, in the photos, you do see like blood everywhere. You see like the napkins people would use to try to like stop the blood flow from the bullets and everything. The initial reports had said that James had done most of the shooting within the first 10 minutes, with the victims basically saying like he had shot everybody and then stopped. But the victims were like, no, that's incorrect. Like, James actually continued shooting for about 40 minutes after he first entered. The documentary on Amazon, I watched it. I mean, I really wasn't impressed with it, mainly because of the director, because he very much tried to be like, oh, well, if the police had done this, it would have been handled this way. And he went off based off a lot of the reports instead of, the people who were actually there. So it does only have 2 stars on Amazon, but it does give you kind of like a good insight on like what happened, like the overview of it and everything. But if you're using that as like a basis to like do any kind of report on this, I would definitely look for different sources.
Yeah, it kind of bothers me when people blame the police for things like this. It's like, okay, they still got there and they still did something. Really, we should be looking at the shooter and figuring out why this happened to prevent it from happening in the first place. Like,
Yeah.
uh,
No, I could do an entire podcast on why this happened and how we could prevent to do it, but we don't
yeah,
have enough time for me to get me into that. Like, we do not.
no,
Absolutely not.
nope,
So
nope.
after the shooting, James's daughters actually and wife actually ended up receiving death threats. His two daughters eventually had to change their name, move, go to a completely different school, stuff like that, just to basically avoid all this. Because back then they really only showed his face or the victim's faces. They didn't really show his daughters' faces, which helped because they had to basically disappear in society because everybody was just going after them. Like it was insane. Like they said they received so many death threats that she couldn't say who she really was for the longest time.
So basically, they had to. I mean, I doubt it was the witness protection program, but they had to sort of set up their own version of it to just, and that's just a shame because it. I mean, they weren't there; they didn't know anything about it. How are they supposed to know that that's
Mm-hmm.
what was going to happen?
Yep. And it's like I feel the exact same way when the San Bernardino shootings actually happened a few years ago. Zelia actually ended up giving like a short interview saying like, be mad at the perpetrators, but remember that the children are innocent. The sins of the
Yeah.
father do not fall on them. And I mean, I think that's a really good thing to like remember is because, this person did this horrible thing and it's freaking terrible that it happened, and that person should definitely be condemned. That person should definitely be hated, all that stuff. But when they have children, those children don't know what their parents doing. They don't know like how, like they don't know that their dad is a murderer. Like I remember I used to watch this show where it was actually like relatives of serial killers or like murderers would come forward and like do interviews, and they were like, we didn't know. We didn't know. We
Right.
were just as upset about this as everybody else was, but they all wanted our heads on a pike along with his and stuff. And it's just
Yeah.
like, you have to remember that like behind these people there is a family that is grieving too because they have to live with the fact that their family member just did this terrible thing. So it's
Yeah.
like, she basically said like she also said stuff like, I envy her because, the San Bernardino shooters, their daughter was a baby. Like she's little. Like she won't remember this. She'll get adopted and she won't remember her real parents, thank God. And Zelia said like, it's nice because, I was in my teens when this happened. So it's like I remember every single thing. I remember everything about my dad. And then I remember this thing that he did. And she's like, it'd be nice to be able to go back and have the innocence again before all this had happened and stuff. And so like you have these people like his dad like reportedly started crying and being like, this is the worst day of my life. I feel so bad for those people. Like
Yeah.
and it was just like his family was just like, this is terrible. So the day after the
Well, and
shooting.
it's like, it sort of is like, I was watching, I watch a lot of strange videos on YouTube because that's what I do. And there was one that was talking about disturbing footage of, it basically was like footage of people who were mass killers in one way or another,
Mm-hmm.
just going about their daily lives and, seeming normal like anybody else because that's what they were. And it was home movies from Jeffrey Dahmer at like Thanksgiving with his family. And he's just sitting there conversing with his family, being a normal person when he has this whole other side to him that was obviously not so normal. So it's the same kind of thing. Like the families oftentimes respond to it, in a completely different way than the rest of the world because they're having to deal with the fact that this person isn't, they feel lied to and betrayed on top of shocked at this thing that happened, because they have to realize that this person that they thought they knew, they didn't really know. And that feels like being lied to. They feel betrayed. And so I feel like those families are oftentimes dealing with a whole new level
All these different
of it than
emotions.
the rest of the world. So when the rest of the world comes to them and starts, berating them, starts hounding them, starts giving them death threats, like I don't blame his daughters and his wife for changing their names and moving away. Not at all, because they're already dealing with their own level of betrayal, and then having the rest of the the world come to them with their betrayal, their feelings of betrayal and
Yeah, like,
upset.
look at what your family member did and everything, and it's like,
They
it's just
know.
insane, but
Right, and
the
that's the thing is they know, and they're dealing with it in their own way, oftentimes with that sense of,
yeah.
ultimate betrayal, let alone just betrayal. So, I don't blame them.
Yeah.
So, nope.
So the day after the shooting, McDonald's ended up suspending any and all ad campaigns that they had on TV. Anything like that was going on, basically McDonald's just kind of dropped off the face of the earth for 2 days. And in
Right.
solidarity, Burger King actually did the exact same thing.
Good for them.
So, yeah, it was good for them because they totally could have used this as a thing of like, oh, well, McDonald's off the air, push more ads. But at the same time, that probably would have been a bad PR thing for them. So there were
Yes.
actually so many victims that the San Ysidro Civic Center was actually being used as a place to like hold the wakes and stuff. One of the main churches in town was having back-to-back funerals, so that way they can get all the bodies buried in time. The shooting ended up affecting a lot of the officers that had responded to the shooting. Obviously, a lot of them had PTSD, a lot of them had nightmares, stuff like that. And it actually
Right.
prompted better training and such within the police department on how to handle these types of things, as this was the
Mhm.
biggest mass shooting on American soil until the Levy shooting happened a few years later, with Columbine following after that.
So what happened to the building itself?
Well, within 2 days, the building had been renovated and was set to reopen.
Of
2
course it
days.
was. Yeah.
Took them 2 days to just cover everything up. So, according to the employees who were the victims there and everything, the franchise had hoped that the restaurant could basically just open again and would be just another, quote, McDonald's that people could go to, unquote. And
Mhm.
for a little bit, people thought that might have happened, but honestly, the restaurant didn't even get to open again. After there was a lot of discussion as well as input from the community, and so the building was actually demolished a little after midnight on September 26th. The city actually ended up McDonald's had actually ended up donating the land to the city under the guise that like no other restaurant would be able to be put there ever. So
Mhm.
like ever. So like they were like even like 30 years down the road, no other restaurant can be put here. And they ended up actually building another McDonald's. I think it was about 2 blocks away from this one. Yeah. So
There was already one 3 blocks
can't stop the
away.
money. Can't stop the money. I think it was in the opposite direction maybe, but so the city had actually gone back and forth about what they wanted to do for like a few years. So eventually it was bought out by the college that was actually built around that area of land and stuff. And so because the city went back and forth, because when something like this happens, especially in a community, like people want something to be able to remember the victim or victims that had perished and stuff. Like when Gannon was found and everything was going on, people were like, oh, we should tear down this and put up a park, or like do this, or like the big census is a park to like be able to have
Right.
the kids go play and stuff. And so it's the same thing with the Watts case. Like people want that house torn down and a park built there, or as like a small memorial or something, so that way the kids can go play and everything. And I get it, because you want something in that area that could like have a new future, like of a loving, like of like a loving like area and
With
stuff,
positive
to not
connotations
erase
rather
like,
than negative ones.
yeah, well, like not to like erase like the history and what happened there, but to like help heal some of the sadness and the hurt. So I get it. So people were like, "Oh, we should do this. Oh, we should do that." So the city went back and forth a lot, and especially with the school, because the school was like, "Look, we own this land now. We're gonna figure out what to do with it. We just got to do it." And eventually, they decided to do a really pretty memorial that was unveiled on December 13th, 1990. So 6 years after the massacre. So the memorials are basically they're hexagonal pillars. There's 21 of them. They're all the way from 1 feet all the way up to 6 feet. Each having a
Mhm.
name of the victims on it. And so basically the different heights represent the different victims and stuff. And so every year on the anniversary, like the memorial is just decked out in cards and flowers and candles for the 3 days for Day of the Dead. The Mexican community comes out
Mhm.
and just absolutely, and I've seen pictures of it like decorated, and like they go hard, like they really do.
Yeah.
um
Yeah, they
but
do.
like it's just
It's
interesting,
right on the border,
because
so
it's
we have
like
a
this
lot
one.
more of those traditions.
Yeah, but like it's just interesting because I looked at because I looked at pictures of the memorial, which led me to looking at pictures of the Columbine Memorial, which led me to looking at pictures of the Pulse Shooting Memorial and the Route 55 Memorial and the Parkland Memorial. And do you see where I am going? I am naming too many things that have happened in this freaking country because of guns. Like, they all look the same.
But it's not the guns though. It's the people who snap
it's not
and
that.
use
I know. And you know what? We're not gonna get into this because let me tell you, I can fill about 3 podcast episodes with this, but I am only gonna end it on with there needs to be better gun control. We need to have better something in this country to help, because it gets to the point where all these kids are dying. Kids.
Right.
Children with futures and lives and things that they need to do and stuff. And it just blows my mind because, we need better teachings. We need better things. And I know so Washington recently, I don't know if they did or not, they were trying to pass, if you get your concealed carry permit or if you get your gun permit and stuff, you have to take classes to teach you how to be safer with these weapons. And I asked a crap ton of my gun-toting friends who were very Second Amendment. I was like, what do you guys think about that? And every single one of them had said, I don't see a problem. This is a weapon. This is a weapon that we have in our hands. We need to learn how to use them. We need to learn how to protect ourselves and stuff, obviously. So I think Washington's thing was hey, if you do this, then you have to take a class. It's not taking anybody's rights away. It's not saying you can't have a concealed carry. It's not saying that you can't bear your arms. It's just saying, hey, we just want to make sure you're just a little safer in handling it and stuff.
Sure. And I don't want to make this a political rant about gun control, because that's not, to me, I mean, I have agreements, I have disagreements, and I don't want to get political with this. The reality is, though, that there's a huge issue with mental health, and the way that America lives their lifestyle causes an immense amount of breakdowns. If you look,
but we also need to be careful how we say that, because we also need to be very careful how we say that, because after the Parkland shooting, I believe it was either after Parkland or the Sandy Hook shooting, it came out that one of those guys, I mean, they all have mental health issues, obviously. It came out that one of those guys actually had severe, he was schizophrenic. And the media really portrayed people with mental health issues as the enemy, as, hey, if you're like this, then you're going to turn out like this. So we have to be very careful on saying, hey, it is a mental health issue, but that doesn't mean if you have a mental health issue, that means you're going to kill people.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that there's lots of people with mental health issues who either don't know how to reach out for help, don't know that they can reach for help, don't have the ability to reach out for help.
Care.
So honestly, the amount of services, even here, there are people, this is a small community, right? My town is less than 20,000 people. Okay. And in my town alone, there are there's one clinic that if you are on low income insurance, you can go to for mental health. And they're so busy that to get an appointment, you are booking your entrance a month out, right? Now, granted, they have crisis help available, but most of these people who need this kind of help, they're so past crisis that they don't understand that that's the help that they need. So really, what it comes down to is that this is, whether you believe it or not, it's an act of terrorism, because this person was out to seek and do the most amount of damage and cause the most amount of terror and feel in control, because I don't think he felt he had any control in his life, period.
Oh yeah.
So this dude
was nuts
of trying to take some form of control back. Okay. And that's a problem, because there's obviously a bigger issue here, because he didn't feel like he had any control. So if he had had the ability or the knowledge, and this was the 1980s, right? Mental health was not a thing that people, if you went and saw a shrink, you had issues and you were shunned by society, period.
Oh yeah.
Okay. The 80s and even in the 90s, it was the same thing. If you saw a therapist, if you saw a shrink, you were crazy and you were shunned. That stigma is still out there in a lot of places, but it's not as bad now as it was then. Okay. So really, I feel like we're moving in the right direction. But also the other issue is, and this isn't just an issue in America, but it's a big issue in America, in that we have very much a sense of me, right?
Mhm.
I'm in charge of my life. I'm in charge of whether or not I should get to have a gun. I'm in charge of whether or not I wear a face mask, right? And if you're telling me I have to do this, if you're taking that right away from me to choose,
Then
that's not
I don't wanna
okay.
do it. Then I don't wanna do it.
Right. And that to me is, again, I'm really trying not to be political. This is something I see in general where people are,
Oh, yeah.
they look at it as people taking their rights away rather than saying, you know, how is this going, is what about this isn't really about me. Okay, everybody thinks it's an
Yeah.
attack on themselves, an attack on their rights, and instead of looking at it as, well, maybe there's more to it. Instead they feel so offended
Yeah.
because their rights are being played with.
And,
So
like,
I think
a lot of people who want better gun control, we don't wanna take your guns away. Shoot your
no.
guns, smoke your weed, marry who you want. We don't care. We don't wanna take your guns away. But what is so wrong about being safer? What is so wrong about a class saying, "Hey, we know that you were probably raised on this since you were 6 because you lived in the
But
backwoods because that's what our town is. But how about we show you a little bit more ways to be safer so you can have them, especially if you have, kids in the house."
okay, but let me ask you this. Okay, and again, trying really hard not to be political about this. But do you really think a class on gun safety would have stopped him from doing what he did?
No, but I think it's a step in the right direction because at this point, it's like
Sure. But same thing with Columbine.
at this
Same thing with
point,
Columbine though, Alex. Yeah.
mental health checks were needed a lot in this one.
And
I'm
I'm
not
not
saying gun safety
disagreeing.
was needed, but I'm also
Right.
saying,
So
people also don't wanna sign up for these classes because then they'll have my information. They have my information, they can come take my weapon. And I'm like, that's don't do illegal shit with your weapon and maybe they won't take it."
sure. But a gun safety class would not have stopped him from doing this. So
Well, I understand that.
it
I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about just in general. Like, it was a part of the me thing because that's the thing. People don't want to do it because it affects my rights when it doesn't.
right,
It doesn't affect your
right.
rights. It affects nothing
But
about you.
ultimately coming back to the case itself, right? The shooting itself. Okay, I just think that there was an obvious, I mean, in this case, it was very much an obvious, like, this is about me, because he, when the crisis hotline didn't call him back, this was his response,
Dude,
because they took his name down
Christ
wrong.
Hotline
And
didn't
I'm
call
not
me. I'm going
saying
to go
it's
kill
their
some
fault.
people.
Right. Not saying it's their fault. Not saying there's really anything that they could have done to prevent, other than, but it's possible they misheard his last name too. I mean, there's so many
No, they
different
did.
steps.
They wrote it down wrong.
Right. So what I'm saying though is it's a domino effect, but the initial start of this domino effect, I mean, it started so far back that there's no way to have known that would have been the beginning. And
Yeah.
that
And it's just
unfortunately is a
insane.
lot of, well, and we can look at it and go, it could have been prevented. It could have been prevented. I mean, absolutely, it could have been prevented, but he freaking lost it, right? And he did
Oh,
this
God.
thing, and it's not okay. And yes, it could have been prevented, but there's no way to have known it could have been prevented when it first started, right? Because it started when he was very
Yeah.
young. He felt abandoned by his mom, and he didn't have any control of where he lived. So he didn't feel he was in control of that. He wasn't in control of his marriage because they had a domestic violence issue. There were a lot of things he didn't feel, he wasn't in control of whether or not he got polio vaccines. So therefore, he
I don't even
wasn't
know
in
if they had the
control.
polio vaccine back then.
It when did the polio vaccine come into play?
I have no clue. I just don't know if they had it back then or if they
Sure.
did. We had hippie
Right.
parents.
So, I mean, again, we don't need to get political. but he wasn't in control of whether or not he contracted polio. He wasn't in control of whether or not he got into the military. Like, there were all of these things where he felt he was completely out of control of his own life, and this was his decision to take that control back. Doesn't mean it was okay, but I see it from that point of view of this was him attempting to take control back, and it's
or just completely losing it. But
right. And then he wasn't in control of whether or not the crisis hotline called him back. Yeah. So he lost control, and this was his way of trying to gain it back. It doesn't mean that it was the right move. It doesn't mean that, but again, the domino effect started so far back that I can't see any way of trying to go back and prevent it. All we can do is look at it and say, okay, so what can we do better?
Here's what we need to do.
Prevent this in the future. And, I think it's a really good opportunity to learn. But again, they're just the way
we haven't learned anything.
No, we haven't. And the reality is there's
that's the bottom line. We can sit here and we can look back at all these mass shootings that we haven't learned anything. It's kids crying out, why are we having to die? Why are we having to die? And adults yelling back, why are you being babies? Basically, like that's what it is. Like, we have not learned anything. And I know I'm probably going to piss a lot of people off, but we have not. And honestly, until America gets out of that whole me mindset, we're not going to learn anything. We're going to continue to let kids die, and we're going to continue to let people die because.
Well, and that's a really interesting point too, because if you look at history, right? Okay, we are still the baby country of the world in a lot of ways. And so I feel like, now that we're hitting this particular stage, and with the way that the world is, I feel like if you can look back at other countries when they were 200, 300, 400 years old, there was a really similar, there's a lot of similarities. And instead of looking backwards to learn, we're just not doing it.
Yeah, we just don't care. And like, that's the thing. And it's like, honestly, you can see that throughout history. Like, don't get me wrong, okay? I love America. I'm proud to be American. Red, white, and blue, woohoo, like, yay. But I'm also an American that can actually look back at our country and be like, we are messed up. Like, and this, and like, stuff like this just proves it. Like, every time, like, I turned on, like, I remember it was like, what? A 3-year stint of like every year there was a mass shooting. I don't think we've had like a mass shooting in a hot minute, actually, but
it's because we've all been at home under quarantine.
Right. Oh my God. But I mean, like, I look back over it and I'm like, every year, and it's like every year it was the same. Like, every year something would happen and the cycle will be the same. Oh my God, thoughts and prayers. These babies are innocent. We need to do something. These people didn't deserve to die. Blah, blah, blah. Thoughts and prayers. And then happen again. Thoughts and prayers. These outrage, all this stuff. And then it happened again. And like, I remember when the Sandy Hook one happened. And like, I remember thinking, these were children. Like, these weren't even teenagers who would like experience part of it. Like, these were my kids. Babies, okay? And like, yes, I just did like they were little tiny tots with my hands, like babies and stuff. And I remember when all the conspiracy theorists came out about those. That never happened. Sandy Hook wasn't real. Those kids never died. Yeah. Oh, look into like the shooter conspiracy.
Oh no, that is a conspiracy with all of these shootings. It's a conspiracy with the Holocaust.
Yeah.
It's a conspiracy with that club
that got shot
up.
Real people.
Yeah. No, the
Holocaust is real people.
Well, it's like saying COVID isn't real. I'm sorry. It's the same thing. It's people who are denying it. There are people who believe that the world is honest to God flat.
Not our visitors, not our listeners, because they're a little smarter than that. But it's just you look back on this, and me doing research on this, I was reading it and I'm thinking, wow, this sounds super familiar. And I was like, oh yeah, it does, because it's every single shooting I've ever read about. Right. But James didn't kill his thousands. Okay, he definitely did destroy enough lives that day to make an impact, though. Though it's been 36 years since the incident, it feels like as it was just yesterday to a lot of survivors. And I know that with everything going on, it probably really does feel like it just happened. However, like with any tragedy in America, I really hope that bringing light to these situations will help people realize that a difference does need to be made, and eventually people can stop dying by the hands of madmen.
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Chill. For more information, including case notes, photos, and sources, visit our website at truecrimeandchill.com. You can also stay connected with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Look for new episodes from us each week on Tuesdays.